You having fun yet?
Oh, yeah, I'm having a blast. Thanks.
Good.
God, sucker teed off on that like he knew I was gonna throw a fastball.
He did know.
How?
I told him.
Yes. And the next time you screech, it'll explode into millions of eardrums.
Just so you understand, right now, out there on your own, your life expectancy is like here. With me, it's here. Without me, here. With me, without me. With me, without me.
Just however many times it takes, pump it, then you're in the water and off you go.
Don't hit Mr. Rogers on a bad day like that. On a good day, you know, treat him as you will. Hey, how are ya? Mark here. I am the Cinemaniac. You watching this program, if you dig flicks like I dig flicks, you are a Cinemaniac, thus making us collectively together all as one, the titular Cinemaniacs. It's been a week, boy has it, since I've been here. I have not a tremendous amount of films to talk about because I've been doing other things, but I did watch films. I always want to inform you about the wonderful things or not so wonderful things that are available out there to fill your eyeballs and your earballs and your other balls with. We have a couple in the theater, we have a couple on video, and then I'll tell you why you're going to have to make do with YouTube for me for a while. So we have one in the theater that is, it's a recognizable brand, which is why this film exists. This is an adaptation. We'll just go over there. The man set the camera up. We might as well use it. There it is. This is a film from Blumhouse, the horror film studio that brought you such hits as horror films that were popular. This is based on a 1970s TV show that many of us grew up watching either on ABC or in reruns. Starred Ricardo Montalban as Mr. Rourke and Hervé Villechaize as Tattoo, and various celebrities every week would come to this place and they would live out their dreams, and they might go great and they might not, but they would learn a little something about themselves in doing it. This is a horrifying, dark take on Fantasy Island. When I was a kid and I would read that word, I thought it said Island. Now you've learned a little something about me. I did learn to read eventually. So this is based on the 70s TV show that I used to watch. Fantasy Island and Love Boat, kind of back to back, very similar in my mind oftentimes. As a kid, I sometimes felt that Fantasy Island was a little creepy at times. Sometimes they had segments or fantasies that would go dark or almost be kind of a horror thing. And most of the time it was a romance or a wish fulfillment thing. So here we have Blumhouse taking that concept of what was a pretty light and fluffy family, let's say for the most part, show and turning it into a scary, nasty horror movie. Which sometimes is a neat idea and sometimes I just find tiresome. Let's take everything that was swell and innocent and make it nasty and gross, and aren't we edgy? So I kind of went into the movie with that attitude, like, okay, great, they're just going to trash this show that I kind of liked as a kid that was very positive. First of all, I'm going to compare the show to this movie, not that I should, and then I'm going to just talk about the movie by itself, because I think the target audience for this is really kind of young people who probably don't even know that there was a show. Now, the whole notion of a dark fantasy island is not new. There was a show that starred Malcolm McDowell as Mr. Rourke, done on ABC sometime, I want to say a few years ago, but at this point in my life, a few years ago could be 25 years. It was sometime in the 2000s, let's say, which is 20 years, that ABC did a dark take, sort of a little bit more supernatural or sci-fi take on Fantasy Island. So this is just going back to that territory. I didn't really watch much more than maybe one episode of that ABC revival series, but the original series of Fantasy Island, it was all people you recognized. It was a lot of TV actors, not usually movie actors, because in those days, the twain didn't meet. People in movies didn't do TV because that was slumming, and people in TV rarely got put in movies because those are TV people. Strangely, the dynamic is completely different now. Everybody wants to work in TV. That's where the action is. And movies are filled with TV people because that's where the studios figure people have more face recognition. Anyway, this new Fantasy Island film, Michael Pena as Mr. Rourke, he seems like a wonderful guy and he does fine in films, but boy, he's no Ricardo Montalban. Maggie Q is really the only other person I recognize. She got her start doing a lot of Hong Kong action movies. People here probably know her from the Nikita TV show that she did. She was an amazing action performer for a long time, but she's also really good dramatically. And in this, she's very good dramatically. And it's always cool for me to see people like Michelle Yeoh or Maggie Q, who I knew essentially as action stars from Hong Kong movies, being cast solely for their dramatic ability, which is great because they always had that. It was just kind of outshone by the fact that they could jump a dirt bike onto a moving train. So Maggie Q, kind of the biggest star. So as far as I'm concerned, this movie doesn't really have any star power like the old show did, which was part of the attraction. But what this movie is selling is the concept. The concept is these people arrive by plane to this secluded tropical island where their fantasies come true, whether that's trying to correct something in their past that didn't quite go right, or achieve something they were never able to do in life for whatever reason, and just live out their dreams. And sometimes the case with the original show, I think to a degree, but this movie is the whole be careful what you wish for thing. You may say, oh, I wish I always could do this, but you don't think about how it could go bad. Now, the setup in this movie is Mr. Rourke greets these groups of people. There's two brothers or half brothers. There is two single women and one single man. And he tells them, your fantasies will play out to a conclusion. So if you get halfway through this and you decide you don't want to do this anymore, the island will make sure that this gets to an end, and it might not be the end that you're looking for. So that setup, and knowing this is a Blumhouse horror movie, yes, this goes in directions that these people didn't want to happen. It is interesting still, like the original concept of the show, to see a what if in somebody's life. What if you could try to correct a mistake you made? Or what if you could get that thing you could never achieve before? Would those things lead you to where you want to be or not? So that kind of intellectual thing is still going on. Interestingly enough, this being a horror movie, it goes in dark places, but it being, I guess, a PG-13 horror movie. And I'm not one of these guys who's like, it has to be R-rated to be horror. If it's not gore, it's not horror. If it's not gratuitous, it's not horror. The Haunting is my favorite horror movie, probably. And that movie doesn't show you anything. And it's incredibly scary 60 or so years later. This movie is weird because it starts to take you down a road and then it just stops. Like, violent things are going on, but you don't see it, which I guess in that sense makes it feel like you're watching a 70s TV show where they couldn't show that stuff. But for a movie like this that is like leading up to being really edgy and then it just always takes a turn, that felt a little off to me. Now, I've read that there's a longer R-rated or unrated cut of this film that the director has that will probably see the light of day on video or streaming. That might actually be a better way to see this movie. To jump forward a little bit, I didn't think this was bad. I don't think it was particularly great. The concept, the idea of a scary fantasy island wasn't new to me, so that wasn't like, ooh. And the cast isn't that great for the most part. Aside from Pena and Maggie Q, they're okay or whatever. I don't know the names of everybody, so I dishonor them by not mentioning them by name. There's a lot more comedy in this film than I expected. The story of the two brothers are these two dudes who just basically want to party and get, hotties of the gender they're interested in. And that's sort of amusing to a degree, but the rest of it is played pretty seriously. And there are moments of drama that kind of work. And if you put yourself in these people's categories, their shoes, you may experience things through their eyes that you maybe have thought about once or something like that. But ultimately, it's just kind of okay. Like, I'm not opposed to the notion of more of these because you could keep doing these films. This film does go a long way toward trying to explain why these things can and do happen on the island, which I believe the old show never did. I don't know if the 2000s show did. I don't necessarily need an explanation, but I guess it played into the plot here. Who is this movie for? If you're a fan of the original series, maybe you would be interested in this, but I think if you're legitimately a fan of the original 70s series, you probably don't want to see people getting murdered left and right in your version of Fantasy Island. And if you don't know the old show, this probably would work better for people who don't know the old show, who just like that idea of a place where you can go to get your dreams fulfilled and maybe they don't quite work out. Now, hardcore horror fans, they're probably going to want to wait to see the R-rated version of this. I'm not one, like I said, who thinks that blood, nudity, and gore makes a movie that much better. depending on the quality of any of those categories, maybe it does sometimes. But to me, it's got to tell about the story and the writing and the acting. And if that's all terrible, then a little entrails is not really going to save your movie. But it's still in theaters. I'm kind of playing a little catch up here. Fantasy Island has been out for about a week, I believe. I don't see this as sticking around very long. I think as a couple of bigger titles come along, it's going to push Fantasy Island out the door. You know, it might be a good, decent matinee or a Friday night date movie, perhaps, but I don't think this movie is really going to be remembered too far down the line. A lot of these remakes never really are, but saying all of that, it's a good concept. It's like the Saw movies. I never liked the Saw movie, but I think it's a good concept, and I think you could do a Fantasy Island that's maybe a bit better than this. Speaking of F movies in the horror genre, I'm a fan of the Final Destination series, and I rewatched the first two recently. And the first movie is good, and it sets up a good concept, but the second one is so much better, and they just get better as they go. So it could be that this Fantasy Island gives you the concept, this is what this place does, this is who these people are, and maybe we bring another group of people into the next one, and it's maybe a higher caliber cast, maybe it's a bit better writing. Although this one, I'll give it credit, it is a bit more complex than I expected it would be. You think you're watching one thing and all these disparate stories, and they start to intersect, and they all kind of tie together in a way that I didn't expect. But when they explain why they're tying together, I was like, did I come in late? Who are they talking about now? It's got all this dramatic weight that we've never heard about before. So anyway, they made a horror version of Fantasy Island, and it's in theaters now. And if you expected me to say too much different than I just did, surprise. So up next is a film that is out, very limited release. This is an art house foreign film that is in a few theaters here and there. It was playing in New York the last time I knew. So it may be a little tricky to track down, but it will be a film that is on demand probably relatively soon if you don't have an art house that's playing it. This is a film about a young female student at a boarding school in France, and she befriends a young female student at a boarding school in France who is from, it's been a while since I watched it, I want to say Barbados or the Dominican Republic or somewhere in the Caribbean, and she's quizzing her about her past and about zombies and about voodoo and things like that. And the two girls' lives kind of intertwine, and their two cultures intertwine when we learn the true tale in the context of this fictional movie of the Zombi Child. A creepy dissolve. So this is a film, this isn't really a horror film, despite the title. This has horror elements, and for a little bit toward the end of the movie, it kind of becomes a horror movie, but this is really much more of a cultural study, which I thought was really interesting. So the film opens in, again, I'm sorry I don't remember the location, in a Caribbean isle in the early 60s, and you see how this man becomes a zombie. And we hear zombie and we think, you know, decaying reanimated corpses that eat flesh or brains or whatever. We think of Romero zombies and what has followed. But historically, zombie was a voodoo thing where somebody would be drugged or somehow made to appear dead, and then they would be brought back to full consciousness and basically enslaved to work in the sugarcane fields or things like that. That's what this movie is talking about. So we see a man have this happen to him. He apparently dies, and he apparently is carried out to the graveyard, and then he is brought back by somebody, and he is made to sort of shamble around in a daze and be slave labor, basically. And the young girl that we talk about later, we flash forward to the present day, or close to the present day, and this girl from the Caribbean who's the new girl in school, and everybody is like, oh, I hear there's zombies where you come from, and she's sort of very reluctant to talk about that part of her culture and her heritage, but eventually she does, and we learn that she is the granddaughter, I believe, of a man that had happened to. So we go back and forth between what was happening to that man in his time and this girl at home, and she's trying to fit in with these, you know, Caucasian French students, and then this white French student who's having a problem, or her boyfriend is far away and she wants him to love her and she wants him to come back to her. So she starts talking and being fascinated by this zombie culture, and she eventually, I'm not giving everything away here, she eventually seeks out the aunt or mother of this young girl from Barbados to try to see if she can use voodoo, employ voodoo on this white girl's behalf to get her boyfriend to come back or something like that. For the most part, like I said, it's very slow. It's a lot of dialogue. It's character driven. It's different cultures trying to integrate, or the girl from the Caribbean is just trying to fit in with everybody else in her class, where they see her as the other and see her much more as an amusement than a friend, at least in the beginning. And then the white girl is trying to use this exotic way to sort of make her life a little bit better. So I'm watching this and thinking, okay, the title is Zombie Child. It makes sense in the context of the story, but anybody who sees this who's of a certain mindset is going to be like, hey, where are the zombies at? Because there really aren't any, as we think of zombies. This isn't about a small child who eats brains. This is something entirely different. So it eventually does get more and more into the whole voodoo thing, and it does become kind of creepy and effective and a horror movie for a little while. But for the most part, this is not that. So just be aware of that. This is much more for somebody who wants to see an art house drama that maybe has a little fantastical nature to it than somebody who wants to see gut munching, because that's not what this is. So Zombie Child is out from Film Movement now in theaters. I believe very soon it will be on demand and on home video. So those are kind of the new releases that I have. But this next thing I saw in the theater, I saw last night in the theater, didn't even know I was going to review it on the show, but why not? We want to have more than 3 movies to talk about. This next thing is a film from 1977, Hong Kong film, that has been preserved and restored by AGFA, not the film stock company, but the American Genre Film Archive. It's this group organization that has grown out of the Alamo Drafthouse Cinema Organization in Austin, Texas, where they started amassing all of these old film prints of oddball genre films. And when I say genre films, musical is a genre. When we say genre film, we tend to mean horror, action, exploitation, junkie genre, the kind of stuff that I love. They started amassing all these film prints and trailers for their theaters, and then they decided to make those films available to rent out to other theaters around the country on film. And now they're preserving these things. They're scanning them at 4K. They're making digital safety masters so that theaters can show them without trucking around what could be the only beat-up print of certain films in existence. And they're doing video releases and streaming and things like that too. I think I've reviewed a couple of Blu-rays that AGFA has been behind that are always very entertaining. They're picking up the mantle from where Something Weird left off, literally, because Something Weird has shipped a lot of their old masters and holdings to AGFA, or they're releasing things through AGFA. Something Weird, sadly, since its founder Mike Vrany died, his widow Lisa Petrucci has been continuing the mission of Something Weird as, sort of, while also sort of divesting herself of a lot of the masters and sending it to other companies that will keep it in good hands. And she's keeping the Something Weird brand alive through these other things. So AGFA put this movie on a big screen for me to watch last night. And boy, let me tell you, this was viewed at the Alamo Drafthouse Yonkers last night, which would have been, let's say, what's the date? Late February 2020. And this is available to other Alamo Drafthouses and probably to other theaters in general. This is a Bruce-sploitation movie. If you've never heard of Bruce-sploitation, we're talking about Bruce Lee. After Bruce Lee died in the early 70s, a lot of people and filmmakers wanted to cash in on his name because his was the name that brought martial arts movies to prominence. They existed long before Bruce Lee came along and long after he came along, but never has there been a name that really ignited the world like Bruce Lee did, and who was a name recognition. Normal people knew who Bruce Lee was. They didn't know who Jimmy Wang Yu was, or Angela Mao per se, but they knew Bruce Lee. After he died, it's scrambling to keep that going. You had movies with the word Bruce in them. You had movies with the word Lee in them. You had movies starring people called Bruce L.I., Bruce L.E. or L. You had all these people whose names kind of looked or sounded like Bruce Lee, but they weren't. They kind of looked like him, but not really. And it was this industry of Bruce-sploitation movies. Told you that story to tell you this one. This is a movie that I saw last night. It's a comedy. I think a lot of people might not realize that going in or partway through it. This is a Hong Kong comedy, and when Hong Kong wanted to make a silly comedy, they sillied like few others have sillied in history. They got really goofy. So this is a story of Bruce Lee waking up in the underworld, the world between heaven and hell, where he had just died. He wakes up in the underworld, and he has to sort of fight his way out. And he is up against an incredible gallery of pop culture figures. He fights The Godfather, who looks nothing like Marlon Brando. He fights the Exorcist, who looks nothing like Max von Sydow. He fights alongside Popeye. He fights Clint Eastwood as the man with no name, James Bond, who looks nothing like a James Bond we've ever known, Zatoichi, the blind swordsman, the one-armed swordsman. It's basically an all-star cast of movie characters over the years that Bruce Lee fights with or against in this totally ridiculous film entitled The Dragon Lives. That which I just showed you was the only trailer I could find for this film. AGFA hasn't put one out online to promote this release. And I don't know how much of a release this is. I think AGFA is restoring a lot of films and they just hold on to them, and if you know how to book them, you just do. That was a trailer for when an LA theater called Cinefamily ran the film many years ago, and it was obviously taken from some really kind of crappy VHS pen and scan print. What I saw last night via the AGFA DCP looked great. I mean, it looks like a beat up print that played for years, and it had scratches and dirt and dust on it like that. But overall, the color was good. It was razor sharp. The scratches just added to the look of watching a print in a grindhouse or watching a print that had been around for a while. So you have a guy who doesn't really look at all like Bruce Lee, waking up in the underworld, and somebody who's an onlooker for the benefit of the audience. And I don't know if this was originally in the script or if they did this in the dubbing, because when you're dubbing a film, you can really pretty much change the dialogue as much as you want. They say, oh, something happens to you after you die. Your body changes and your face doesn't really look the same anymore. I'm like, thanks. That's a perfect, great. You've gotten out of jail free. This guy doesn't look like Bruce Lee. I mean, he does the Bruce Lee mannerisms and stuff, and he's a really good martial artist, but he doesn't look like Bruce Lee. The dubbing is very interesting. And I'd like to hear the original dub track at some point, because they make no effort to make Popeye sound like Popeye. There's no ugg-ugg-uggs. It's Eric Tsang, who you might know from some 80s Hong Kong martial arts and action comedy movies. And then in the 90s, he moved into being pretty much a dramatic actor in like the Infernal Affairs movies and things like that. He plays a Popeye that is identifiable enough as Popeye. His sidekick I never could quite pinpoint. I think maybe he was supposed to be Kane from Kung Fu, but I wasn't sure. The guy who plays James Bond looks nothing like him. He has huge sideburns. He wears a tuxedo and whips out a gun every once in a while. The Clint Eastwood guy's Asian, but he wears the smock, so he kind of looks like Clint Eastwood. The guy who's supposed to be the Godfather, he just looks like a well-dressed Asian man. I mean, they call him the Godfather. Is he supposed to be Michael Corleone? Who knows Fu? I'm not quite sure. The Exorcist guy is an Asian guy with a beard who wears like a frock, and they call him Exorcist. And he has this really bad French accent. We will see if the Bruce Lee will come and fight us for the trophy. About as good as that. And it's just silly. It's incredibly silly. There's a lot of Fu. The Fu is pretty good. It's not dynamically shot, but it's shot in the old style where you could actually see what everybody was doing. It's very inventive and silly. It's a comedy. It's a silly, silly comedy. And at one point, Dracula shows up. He's an Asian man with big fangs in broad daylight in a quarry. Apparently, SPF is really strong that they were using back then. Somebody summons an army of mummies, and they go into all these really weird, silly stances, and throughout the film when they're fighting, they'll yell out, whatever style they're about to fight in, and it'll show up on screen. My favorite was Bruce Lee's third leg style. I'll go no further than that. There were zombies, but they looked like the Cobra Kai guys in the skeleton costumes from Karate Kid, and that was funny. This is a ridiculous film. This is a film that I highly recommend. If you like good trashy movies like I do, if you can find a copy of this in any form, preferably widescreen, because seeing that trailer, seeing how badly pan and scan it was, remembering in my head what the compositions looked like, you really don't want to see that. You really don't want to watch martial arts, but you don't want to watch anything pan and scan, but you don't want to watch martial arts that way because you can't see what everybody's doing. It makes it look like a modern martial arts movie. I don't know where this is going to play. I just wanted to present to you the information that The Dragon Lives Again, I left a word out when I was introducing it, The Dragon Lives Again from 1977 is a film that your local theater, if it's not an AMC or a chain, your local theater can contact AGFA, or you can contact your local independent theater. Say you want them to book The Dragon Lives Again, and then maybe you want to promise that you'll get about 80 people to show up, because otherwise it'll just be you. But at the Alamo last night, there was a good number of people, but this is in Yonkers, this is close to New York City. There's a good fan base, and there's a good audience for weird stuff like this. So we all had a really great time, and there was a lot of laughs, a lot of people going, what? And I just kind of loved it. Lots of music stolen, which was the common practice in Hong Kong films up into the 80s. You were just going to drop that needle on the Enter the Dragon soundtrack record. And maybe we're going to drop that needle on the Exorcist soundtrack or The Godfather or maybe a little theme from Shaft. Actually, we're going to play a little of Kung Fu Fighting because that really drives the point home that there's martial arts in this film. It made me smile. What can I say? The dragon lives again. I don't know how easy it's going to be for you to see, but believe me, you can request things at your local theater. If it's not a theater chain, and if you get enough people doing that, or maybe enough of a promise, maybe you want to just foot the bill for this movie to show at your local theater, they can get these things. AGFA has a huge list. Believe me, they have a huge list of films that they will rent out on DCP to theaters, including a lot of movies that like Arrow and Vinegar Syndrome and some other companies have put out. So it's not just these AGFA titles. Anyway, I had a great time. I'll move on to normal movies that you've probably more interested in seeing than the Kung Fu movies where Bruce Lee fights Popeye. Okay, so now on to home video. This is the home video format, system, channel, service, device of your choice. This is an Oscar-nominated film I'm going to talk about with actual actors that played in theaters that you've probably heard of, about somebody you've definitely heard of. We'll go over here to honor that second camera. So we have Tom Hanks as Mr. Rogers. He was a nice guy. Tom Hanks and Mr. Rogers, by all accounts. This is the story based on a true story, based on the notion of a true story, about a reporter who is issued the rigid dictum to interview Mr. Rogers and do a profile piece on him as an American hero. This is a cynical guy who's not very happy. He thinks it's a garbage fluff piece assignment, but he goes and does it anyway, and he winds up learning a lot more about Mr. Rogers and about himself than he expected, because it turns out to be a beautiful day in the neighborhood. I heard about this film, saw the trailers, and I thought, is there a point to this? Because we just had the Mr. Rogers documentary a year or two ago, which the name of it always slips my mind, but there's a Mr. Rogers documentary that is excellent, and it's all interviews with him, interviews with people now that he knew or who had worked with him on his show or grew up with him. Lots of archival footage, and it's amazing, an amazing document and tribute to a man who was far more wonderful and amazing than a lot of people realize, because, oh, he was that silly, cheesy guy on TV. When you see what he talks about and what he was going for in his messages, it's just like, I don't know anybody who watched that documentary and wasn't bawling by the end of it, because part of it is it's you missing your childhood, part of it is you missing that time and a person like that being on TV regularly. And then part of it is, I kind of wish the world could be the way he wanted it to be. So you watch that documentary, and then you hear that there's going to be this movie that's a biopic, and you're like, well, I kind of already saw that, and I don't need to see somebody else pretending to be Mr. Rogers. So that's kind of what I went to the theater with for Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. And you quickly realize, for better or worse, this movie is not the Mr. Rogers story. This is not a biopic of Fred Rogers. Tom Hanks as Mr. Rogers. I never forgot that I was looking at Tom Hanks playing Mr. Rogers. This movie is really more about the reporter. This is about the reporter who is very unhappy with aspects of his life, and he has got this assignment that he thinks is garbage, and he's very reluctant, and he's trying to ask hard-hitting questions and expose Mr. Rogers as a fake and all that, because that's kind of what he does, is expose people. And he slowly is softened up by just the kindness and care that Fred Rogers had for him and for anybody. And you see this unlikely friendship growing, and it really is mostly about this other guy. So people should know going in that Mr. Rogers is only in a portion of the film. Is throughout the whole movie, but he's not really the focus. Now, I had talked to my lady Val about that after she saw it, and she said, well, no, Fred Rogers is everywhere in this movie. His presence is felt. His actions are felt throughout the movie. You just don't see him the whole time. So there is that way of thinking of it, too. It's not a terribly accurate film. Not in portraying how Mr. Rogers was. As far as the story of the movie, it's mostly fictional. Again, that History versus Hollywood site that I really like, I went to look this film up, and apparently it bears, you can go online, I think via that History versus Hollywood site or Esquire, you can go and you can read the actual interview and profile piece that launched the notion of this movie, and there is a book out by the original author that the reporter is based on that sort of expands upon that, that's readily available. but apparently the original reporter whose story this purports to tell asked that they change the name of the reporter in this film because it bears so little resemblance to the reality of how things went. The basic facts are there was a reporter, this is what his intentions were, and they wound up becoming friendly and staying connected for the rest of Mr. Rogers' life. But a lot of the incidents you see in the film and the stuff based on the reporter's life at home was fabricated for the movie. Not that that matters in the scheme of things to a lot of people. They just want to see an entertaining film with Tom Hanks, who everybody loves, playing a character that pretty much everybody loves. And on that level, it is successful. Just for me personally, watching it, I cared less about the reporter than I did about Mr. Rogers. They do really interesting things stylistically with this movie. When you see the reporter traveling to and from to do his story, it is conveyed often like you remember the opening of Mr. Rogers where the camera is moving down over the little street and it's all miniature cars and things like that. They recreate that for the movie, for the opening titles, but then whenever he flies somewhere, it's all done with miniatures in that style, and it's really impressive and it's really cool. And something that you see in the film, in the theater and at home, which you used to not be able to do in theaters, now that theaters are not running film anymore, they're running essentially video projection, not everybody picks up on this difference, but I think it's neat when you can do it. So in the old days, if you had a film shot on 35 millimeter and you wanted to incorporate videotape footage in that, you transferred that videotape to film and it looked weird. It didn't look like videotape. It looked like closer to film, but not quite. Now you can cut back and forth between the two. So you have all of the narrative fictional stuff in this film that looks just like film, like we're always used to seeing on the big screen. Or in a movie, and then it'll cut to clips from Mr. Rogers' show, and that'll be actual video. So it looks much more, to me, at my eye, realistic than film does. And that was really cool to experience on a theater screen. It'll probably be the same at home, because it'll look different to you. It'll look more like TV, and it seems more in keeping with what you remember Mr. Rogers looking like, or the show at least. So the film is good. It's a good drama. It's heartwarming. It's a tearjerker. It's everything you expect it would be. It is just not what you might expect it be in terms of the story of Mr. Rogers. There's a great documentary for that. And I think before that great documentary, whose title I can't remember, Please Be My Neighbor? Won't You Be My Neighbor? Maybe it was called Won't You Be My Neighbor. There was also a PBS documentary about Mr. Rogers, which I'm told is quite good too. So you have a couple choices for a really good telling of the actual story. And this is just, let's say, even if it's fictional, it's an example of how nice a guy this was, because most of what you see from Fred Rogers in this film was true. So that's out on video now. The last thing I have is it's the Arrow Video Corner. Now, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit in what I'm going to tell you about, in that I'm taking an extended vacation from reality, from reality, work life, and this show. So when I come back, there's going to be a mountain of Arrow videos to talk about. So when I come back and do the next episode of this show you see that's new, it very well might just be me talking about Arrow videos, because I've already got some that I haven't watched, and there's going to be a lot more. So if you don't like the kind of goofy stuff I talk about, you probably skip the next episode. If you do, you want to watch the next episode, because it's going to be an hour solid of me talking about Arrow and MVD and Blue Underground and all the really fun stuff. So here we have a collection. Arrow has been really knocking it out of the park the last couple of years with Japanese horror films, Japanese movies in general, but doing collections like they did the Ring collection recently, where it was all or most of the Ring films in one set with crazy extras and looking amazing. Now we have another film series that launched in Japan in 2003. This is, not coincidentally, much like The Ring, based on technology, based on technology that was relatively new when the film was released. This is a series of films about people who get a phone call seemingly from somebody they know, but they don't quite make sense. And then as time passes, bad things happen. And you really hope that when you open up your flip phone in 2003, you do not have one missed call. Okay, I am not kidding. This is not for effect. While that trailer was playing, I had one missed call. So I might be dying soon. I got a missed call on the phone. That was freaky. So what this is the One Missed Call trilogy. This set from Arrow. This is the three Japanese One Missed Call films that were released over the span of a few years. I watched all three recently. I don't know that I'd ever seen these before. I might have seen the first film. First film, One Missed Call, directed by Takeshi Miike. They're all, the three films are vaguely similar. Somebody gets, as I said earlier, somebody gets a phone call, it's from somebody they know, it's some cryptic message, and then later you find out that either the recipient or the person who sent that call dies in a really horrible way, and it's very much like The Ring. These films would not exist if The Ring didn't exist. It's pretty obvious when you watch it, because it is like a viral, it spreads from person to person. Oh, did you get the call? I don't hope I get the call. Don't answer it, make sure you answer it. And people die in gruesome ways that look like accidents oftentimes. And they're racing to figure out, why it's happening, and you get the backstory of some incident that happened a long time ago. It's really, really similar to The Ring, but instead of a videotape that you have to watch, it's a phone call that you get. These films, I didn't find them to be that great. They have their moments. They're certainly terrifying and creepy moments. These all are from, like I said, the early to mid 2000s. They look fantastic on this set. They're loaded with extras. There's a lot of contemporary behind-the-scenes interviews, all kinds of footage taken from when the films came out. There are commentaries, I believe. I didn't really delve into the extras on these. I didn't really have time. I got through the films. And there are, I believe there are critical appreciations too, where you have genre experts talking about the film in the context of what else was going on around that time, what influenced them, and then what they influenced in turn. There was a 2008 American remake of One Missed Call. There was that rash for a while. The Ring got remade by Gore Verbinski with Naomi Watts, and that was a big hit. So we saw this rash of these. There was a Ju-On, and there was a One Missed Call, and there's, I think The Eye might have been remade here. There was a series of them that sort of had diminishing returns. I didn't see too many of them, but I think The Ring hit huge, and everybody said, ooh, this is the next trend, and they just sort of sunk in popularity, and they all had, the girl with the long dark hair, and somebody opening up their pants and a hand shoots out, whatever, that kind of thing. There's an amount of that in this movie, not the pants thing, but a creepy ghostly hand creeping, or somebody in the background, and you turn around and they're gone. I think if you like J-horror, these films are not bad. I think they pale. There's The Ring, which is so great, and there's so many movies that have been chasing that thrill ever since The Ring. Even the sequels to The Ring that I reviewed for the other Arrow set, I didn't feel like were anywhere near as good as the original. Occasionally they would give you that same creepy hair standing up on the back of your neck vibe, but it was tended to be mining the same territory again and again, or it would try to go deeper and deeper to explain why things are the way they are, and for me that never quite works. I don't necessarily need to know what that center of the onion looks like. So One Missed Call is kind of similar. It's One Missed Call 2, and the third one, let me see, One Missed Call 3, Final. I don't know if they made any more after that or if that was the last one. They're all out from Arrow now in what I get very simple sort of review copies of these films. So the content on the disc is identical to what you get when you buy this, but I don't get the packaging. So I sort of see imagery and read about the packaging. And these tend to come with like a book full of essays and reversible covers and posters and all kinds of crazy stuff. So if you're a fan of the One Missed Call movies, what we ran there was the trailer for when Tokyo Shock had released this on DVD years ago. This version undoubtedly looks far better than the Tokyo Shock disc did a long time ago. It was just the only trailer I could find. And anything with Arrow, it's pretty safe to say, even if it had a previous release in this country, they always kick it up a notch. They always do, if not a new transfer, they lob on way more extras than you've ever seen before. And they almost always, I don't know of an instance of anything I've bought from Arrow where I didn't get rid of, if I owned it before, I didn't get rid of the previous one because it was pointless. The Arrow versions are always the best. So if you like J-horror, you might like One Missed Call. I thought they were just okay, but I was happy to have finally seen all of these movies because they're ones I'd read about for years. That's all I have on my list. We've got 10 minutes left. So let me tell you, I'm going to tell you how it's going to be. I'm taking a trip far, far away. My lady and I are getting in a car next week, and we are hightailing it from sea to shining sea. We are cannonballing, mostly at, reputable speeds, from New York through the southwest, up to California, Vegas, and then back. So I'm not going to be able to do a show. If you are watching me on Facebook, if I see anything current in the theaters, I probably will do a Facebook review. For you who watch us on TV, when I get back, I'll do a recap of everything I've seen and a catch-up for all of the video releases. So there won't be a new Cinemaniacs on your TV or long form on YouTube or Facebook for at least until the second week in April, probably. But if you follow us on Facebook, I may be posting little bits and pieces here and there. We're planning to go to the Alamo Draft Houses in Raleigh and Austin, and maybe anywhere else we can find one. So if you're interested in various movie theaters, part of our trip is to see cool theaters. So I'll post that stuff on the Cinemaniacs page for those who are interested. It'll be interesting and it'll be fun. So what I'm going to do, if you're watching this show on a local cable access station, is I will give those stations some reruns. Some shows from way back when Tom Cook and I were doing the show, and we would talk about our favorite movies. I've compiled those into individual episodes. So the next couple weeks will be filled with something. It just won't be me talking about new movies. If you have any questions, if you have any suggestions of where I should go on the road, let me know, because we're going to be on the road for a month and we're going to be hitting most of the US. So if there's a really cool theater or a quirky place or a giant tomato in a field made of concrete, movies@CheshireTV.org or that Facebook address, let me know, and I'll report back. So I think I'm just going to cut it short. I don't really have anything else to talk about. That's all the movies that I watched. There's more Arrow on the way. There's a movie called Manon, and there's Kansas City Confidential, a couple of older titles that Arrow Academy has put out. Those I didn't get a chance to watch for today. There's an MVD release of a movie called Mind Games with Maxwell Caulfield from 1989. That I will talk about the next time. And whatever else I'm sent, it'll be, if you've watched this show for a while, there were episodes where Tom and I rattled through like 18 movies in 60 minutes. That's probably what the next show is going to be like. So if you think I'm talking fast now, check me in April. So until then, I'm Mark. I'm the Cinemaniac. I will see you on the road or at the movies. Bye.